If you read Bill Bryson's very entertaining travelogue, Down Under, you'll find this passage very near the start. In January of 1997, according to a report written in America by a Times reporter, scientists were seriously investigating the possibility that a mysterious seismic disturbance in the remote Australian outback almost 4 years earlier had been a nuclear explosion set off by members of the Japanese doomsday cult Aum Shinrikyo. It happens that at 11:03 p.m. local time, on the night of the 28th of May 1993, seismograph needles all over the Pacific region twitched and scribbled in response to a very large-scale disturbance near a place called Banjowarn Station in the Great Victoria Desert of Western Australia. Some long-distance lorry drivers and prospectors, virtually the only people out in that lonely expanse, reported seeing a sudden flash in the sky and hearing or feeling the boom of a mighty but far off explosion. One reported that a can of beer had danced off the table in his tent. The problem was that there was no obvious explanation. The seismograph traces didn't fit the profile for an earthquake or mining explosion. The shock was consistent with a large meteorite strike, but the impact would have blown a crater hundreds of feet in circumference, and no such crater could be found. The upshot is that scientists puzzled over the incident for a day or two, then filed it away as an unexplained curiosity. Bryson continues, Australia is so vast and empty that a band of amateur enthusiasts could conceivably set off the world's first non-governmental atomic bomb on its mainland, and almost 4 years would pass before anyone noticed. So did that really happen? Did a cult set off a nuke in the Australian outback and no one noticed? Let's look into this further. So if we go back to the New York Times article that Bryson references, it was published on January the 21st, 1997. And I quote, "The fear was that the terrorists, Aum Shinrikyo, had acquired nuclear arms or other weapons of mass destruction and had been testing them that night in the Australian wilds. The hope was that the upheaval was an earthquake, a mining explosion, or even a meteorite strike from space. Any natural event. The evidence was ominous. Investigators discovered that the cult had tried to buy Russian nuclear warheads and had set up an advanced laboratory on a 500,000 acre ranch in Australia near the puzzling event. At the ranch, investigators found that the sect had been mining uranium, a main material for making atomic bombs. In their investigations into the cult, the American and Australian governments found that, and I quote from the New York Times again, Aum Shinrikyo, or Supreme Truth, turned out to have accumulated some $1 billion and to have won more than 50,000 converts in at least 6 countries. Senate investigations say that the cult recruited at least 2 nuclear scientists in Russia. Notebooks later seized from Kiyohide Hayakawa, deputy leader of the group, show he wanted to buy the ultimate munition there. In one entry he asked, "How much is a nuclear warhead?" In Australia, the activities were just as troubling. Cult members arrived in April 1993, a little more than a month before the mystery blast. Mr. Hayakawa, apparently fresh from visits to Russia, was among the initial party. After visiting several remote sites, the group bought a 500,000 acre sheep farm in Banjowarn, Australia, about 400 miles north of Perth. The site has a known uranium deposit. The cult eventually brought in chemicals, gas masks, and respirators, and picks, shovels, mining equipment, and a mechanical ditch digger. It also set up a laboratory stocked with computers, glass tubing, glass evaporators, beakers, Bunsen burners, mixing bowls, and a rock crushing machine. Eventually, the IRIS team, that's the Incorporated Research Institutions for Seismology, calculated that the event was 170 times larger than the largest mining explosion ever recorded in the Australian region, helping to rule out that possibility. The disturbance was calculated as having the force of a small nuclear explosion, perhaps equal to up to 2,000 tons of high explosives. Nevertheless, the IRIS experts judged that the violent episode was probably natural in character rather than being a man-made blast, prompting officials in Washington to breathe a sigh of relief. But it's far from over yet. The article just gets stranger and stranger. The article continues. Still, one remote but still worrisome possibility remained. Aum Shinrikyo had apparently studied seismic warfare and artificially triggering earthquakes, a terrifying prospect for quake-prone Japan. The cult apparently sent a party of its members to the former Yugoslavia to study the work of Nikola Tesla, the discoverer of alternating current, who toyed with the theory of seismic weapons before he died in 1943. At the Tesla Museum in Belgrade, the members seem to have reviewed Tesla's thesis and other research papers concerning such weapons. Many geophysicists view seismic warfare as a fantasy that is highly unlikely to ever materialize. Even so, the subject has been quietly studied for decades by governments worldwide, including the Soviet Union and the United States during the Cold War. The IRIS team worked with computers and lengthy calculations, eventually showing that an iron meteorite striking the Earth at an oblique angle could have created the seismic upset. A meteorite 5 or 6 feet wide would have dug out a crater some 300 feet in diameter, the team calculated. Despite preliminary searches, no impact crater has been found in the Australian outback. Even so, Senate investigators are increasingly confident that the episode was natural in origin. Eventually, we got information that led us to believe the group was out of the country at the time of the blast, said John F. Sopko, senior counsel to the subcommittee. That pretty much eliminated the possibility of a weapons test. So it seems that Aum Shinrikyo did not detonate a nuke in Australia in May of 1993, but that might not have been from lack of trying. The group, of course, became infamous due to the sarin gas attacks in the Tokyo subway in March 1995, which killed 13 people, seriously injured 15 more, and affected up to 1,000 people. So if the group didn't set off a nuke in Australia, it's likely that they did use the site to prepare for the Tokyo attacks. The New York Times article refers to the fact that they found gas masks and respirators at the site in Banjawan. Motivation: why did the group attack the people of Tokyo, and why did they want to buy a nuclear weapon? Initially drawing on elements of Buddhism and Hinduism, the group's leader, Shoko Asahara, was also interested in Christian notions of the apocalypse. He was convinced that World War III was imminent. The group believed that Armageddon was inevitable in the form of a global war involving the United States and Japan, that non-members were doomed to eternal hell but could be saved if killed by cult members. So Aum Shinrikyo were killing people to save them. The group thought that only members of the cult would survive the apocalypse and would afterwards build the kingdom of Shambhala. Obviously, this is madness. There is no rationale. It's totally irrational. Another example of a charismatic, manipulative demagogue exploiting the fears and desires of impressionable young people. In the context of Japan, the group appealed to people who were disillusioned with the social and economic pressures in Japanese society, particularly the pressure to conform to social norms and to have a successful career. Let's just be thankful that Aum Shinrikyo didn't manage to get their hands on a nuke and test it in the Australian outback.